My dear friends, it's great to see you. In case we haven't been introduced before, I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. You like them crazy eyes, huh? On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And on this episode, we're going to be doing a dramatic reading of another H.P. Lovecraft short story, Nyarlathotep. This one isn't all cephalopods, tentacles, and unspeakable horrors, but I feel like it's very relevant to the day we find ourselves in. And when I get done with this, I'll tell you my thoughts on why that is, and I'd love to see yours in the comments. So without further ado, let us get into Nyarlathotep by H.P. Lovecraft. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos. I'm the last. I'll tell the audient void. I do not recall distinctly when it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. To a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger. A danger widespread and all-embracing, such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces and whispered warnings and prophecies which no one dared consciously repeat or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses between the stars swept chill currents that made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demoniac alteration in the sequence of the seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were unknown. And it was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was, none could tell, but he was of the old native blood and looked like a pharaoh. The fellahin knelt when they saw him, yet could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and that he had heard messages from places not on this planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal, and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep, and shuddered. And where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, for the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon, as it glimmered on green waters gliding under bridges and old steeples crumbling against a sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, that what was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy, and that in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before, yet which shewed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others did not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowds to see Nyarlathotep. Through the stifling night and up the endless stairs into the choking room, and shadowed on a screen, I saw hooded forms amidst ruins, and yellow, evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments. And I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. Then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood up on end, whilst shadows more grotesque than I can tell came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a trembling protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drave us all out, down the dizzy stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I could never be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swore to one another that the city was exactly the same and still alive, and when the electric lights began to fade, we cursed the company over and over again and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for when we began to depend on its light, we drifted into curious, involuntary formations and seemed to know our destinations, though we dared not think of them. Once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to shew where the tramways had run. And again we saw a tramcar, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed that the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocking moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked toward the open country, and presently felt a chill which was not of the hot autumn, for as we stalked out on the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows, swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I had heard the reverberations of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight. As if beckoned by those who had gone before, I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid, into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in hands that are not hands, and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation, corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brush the pallid stars and make them flicker low, beyond the world's vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time. The detestable pounding and piping whereunto dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, tenebrous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles whose soul is Nyarlathotep. And there it is. So in the story, we get a tale of a charismatic, unknown figure who comes out of the East from the Western perspective, because that's what Lovecraft wrote, from the Western perspective, who knew secrets and moved in ways in which normal men knew not, whose words and prophecies made men abandon reason, that took over their minds with daemons of their own, possessing them. They weren't people of their own faculties anymore. They were instead NPCs run by a meme, by a psychological operation, whose end goal was more horrible than any of them knew. Even the narrator, he thought he was stronger, he could resist, and he couldn't, not in the slightest. And then comes ruin, then comes the end of the world. And frankly, that reminds me a lot of the book of Revelation. And if you've read it, and if you've been paying attention to the news of the day, I think you might see some similarities. And that's the kind of feeling I get from our modern age. We live in a doomed time, ruled over by madmen, whose greatest lust seems to be, at least for those living in the West, to exterminate their fellow humans, assuming they are human, in fact. And the ruined worlds the narrator saw beyond the portal to the void reminds me of the Jewish idea of the klipot, the worlds that God created before ours that had just a little too much evil in them and broke, and which could be the origin of the idea of hell, because not everything died in those worlds. Instead, they're mad and evil, and they want to drag us down with them. And there are those who would call upon them. My dear friend, while you might not countenance such an insane idea as trying to contact demons and spirits and this and that and the other, I assure you, there are those who do. There might not be a lot of them, but it only takes one to get it right once, and we're all screwed. So that's my take on Nyarlathotep and the day and age in which we find ourselves. What do you think? What did you get out of this story? I hope you enjoyed it, and remember to put your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And if you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and share this thing around. I'd certainly appreciate it. My dear friends, as we part for now, I wish you nothing but a better future than what I saw. I wish you nothing but the best.